Hi guys, hi from chilly South Africa. My dog is so cold that he's actually brought his bed. I didn't have anything to do with it. He decided to bring his bed to the room. I don't know if you can see him over there. Oh, it's not because I'm using the green screen. It's not actually allowing me to show you. That's unfortunate. Anyway, he dragged his bed all the way from the other room to be warm and comfortable. So kind of quite interesting. Good to see a couple of you here already. Spirit of 1776, Ricardo Ortiz, Mel Stiller. Interesting comment there. Gina, just Gina, and Melinda Lawler, Jennifer Gill from Oregon. Good to see you guys. So the format, the program for today that I want to go through is, first of all, to touch on the recent news, the fact that Amber Heard has lost her bid to dismiss the $10 million judgment. Remember, she wanted a retrial, basically, right? So that's the first thing that I want to talk about briefly, and then I want to go into really the topic of today's discussion, which is how is the witch trial of Amber Heard related to Roe versus Wade, and we'll sort of intro into that whole topic by kind of asking a couple of you, is it a witch trial? Do you think it's a witch trial? I've already covered that in a previous episode where I described what a witch trial looks like and the history of witch trials in America briefly. So I feel like I've really covered that terrain, but we'll revisit it very quickly, and then we'll go into a very interesting article dealing with Roe versus Wade. And then from there, I want to go into the, what do you call it, the legal mechanism that is an appeal. And what I want to do is go completely out of Depp versus Heard and go to a case that I'm going to present to you, if you're interested, if you can think laterally, if you can think outside of the box. So the idea is that I'm going to try to quickly present to you guys a completely separate trial, and then I want to get your assessment on that trial, and then we're going to look at what happens after that and see if your legal pendulum shifts at all while we're going through that particular narrative, that particular legal narrative. I just want to greet a couple more people. Bria Lace in France. Bria, I believe it's really, really hot in Europe. There's a heat wave sweeping through the west of Europe. I believe France is particularly hot. Portugal, 44 degrees, just unbelievable heat. So I hope you guys are doing okay. I don't know what it's like in America, but apparently very, very hot. Roses are red, P54. Good to see you here as well. Gina says it's not a witch trial. Okay. So Gina, are you watching a video that is got the witch trial of Amber Heard in its title? Terry Dean, good to see you here. Bria says there is a heat wave in France. Karina, is it also so hot in France? Robbie Robin, good to see you here. So as per usual, I don't really want to have a antagonistic I'm on this team or I'm on that team. The idea is that we think about ideas, we share ideas, and hopefully we learn something along the way. So it's not really to take up a position. It's really to be in that scout mindset where we go, what is going to happen here? And for me, the interesting part of Depp versus Heard isn't so much the things that I think preoccupy everybody else, but it's the legal side of it. The legal narrative I find quite interesting. I find it fascinating that in one country you have one outcome, legal outcome, and in another one you have another legal outcome. What does one make of that? I don't know what you guys make of that either. Jennifer Gill says only 72 in rural Oregon, but the rest of the US is scorching. Yeah. Roses Are Red says it's very hot here in California, I'm sure. Wendy says, I'm in St. Petersburg, Florida, and it's very hot here. And I believe Amber and Johnny Depp trial is over and justice was served for Johnny. Okay. As do most Americans, it looks like. Okay, so in terms of our poll, let's just have a look. So 73%, that's, about 3/4 of you say that it didn't look or feel like a witch trial, right? So we'll come back to that. What I want to sort of focus on right now, what I want to just sort of start on right now is the latest news, which is that Amber Heard has lost her bid to dismiss the 10 million judgment against her. And the thing that I think is quite interesting is now she really doesn't have any option. Now the situation is her only option now is to appeal, right? She can't go down any other legal avenue except to appeal, or of course to accept the judgment against her and pay up, but of course she doesn't have the money. So the thing that one's got to sort of ponder is, and let me ask those of you who feel that justice was done, if Amber Heard is guilty, why is she persisting? Why is she effectively making life harder? So in other words, if you had to put your shoes in Amber Heard's shoes, and I know it's quite hard for you to do, but if you had to say, okay, this person that you believe lied about absolutely everything, this person that you believe is absolutely guilty, why do you think she's persisting? In other words, she's actually going to be adding to her sort of legal woes, right? What's your response to that? Jennifer Gill, there is no mistrial. That sort of door has been locked. That's now no longer an option. David says her own words were a downfall, not the ramblings of some false witnesses. Gina says she doesn't have much to lose, and I believe they okay. Well, I must say, Gina, if you believe they were both violent, then Amber shouldn't have lost. I think a lot of people don't understand the law with regard to that. If they were both violent, then neither of them should have gotten any money. They shouldn't have. In other words, there's no defamation if both of them were violent. So if you say that she's got nothing to lose, and that's why she's persisting, I don't know if I agree with that, because she's got what she's already lost to lose again. In other words, more legal fees, etc., etc. So, I just think it's quite interesting if you think she's sitting there thinking, oh yes, like if you think about what a lot of people believe, you think that she set Johnny up, that it's all lies, that Amber's absolutely guilty. Then why on earth would she say, I'm gonna continue with this legal thing? So what's your explanation for that? So I think what is definitely worth thinking about is I've sat in on a couple of trials, and these are criminal trials and also murder trials, and invariably, let's take three as an example. In all three cases, there were appeals. In two of those cases, it was because the defendant appealed, so the defendant was found guilty and they appealed. And then in the other case, Oscar Pistorius, he got quite a light sentence, and so the state appealed against that. And so what is quite interesting is, of those three cases, the Oscar Pistorius case, the state won the appeal. As far as I know, I think Oscar then appealed against the judgment of the state, and then appealed again to a higher court and again to a higher court, and eventually he ran out of appeals. But basically, the Oscar Pistorius case is a good example where the state appealed and then won, and then Oscar appealed against that, and then nothing happened. And then there were two other cases, high-profile South African cases, where it looked pretty obvious that the people were guilty. They both appealed, lost, and that was the situation. So if you just think of it on that sort of basis, out of these three high-profile cases, the Pistorius case, the Van Breda case, a triple axe murderer, and then also Jason Roeder, who was accused of murdering his wife. Out of those three, there was only one appeal that succeeded, and it was the one where the state believed that Oscar Pistorius was guilty, right? As I say, he then appealed that verdict and that sentence, I think, and lost. Karina says, the Deline says it's time everyone was held accountable for their actions. Sharon Tuck, good to see you here. David says, if the parties are so entrenched to require a jury trial, they're also quite prepared to continue the process through appeal. I think you need to just bear in mind that she doesn't have any money. So if you don't have any money and you still want to go the legal route, what does that speak about? And I think that there are a couple of ways to interpret that. I think the one way is that she's very emotional and she's very, she's going a legal route that is perhaps ill-advised in a way. The other side of it is she's got nothing else to do. She doesn't have a job, she doesn't have a life, she doesn't have any money, and this has kind of become her mission, kind of thing. In a way, you could say that her back is against the wall, right? Rhonda says UK trial, she didn't win. He was going against the Sun, but in her mind, she won that case. I must say, I'm quite frustrated when I see comments like that. I sort of wonder, are you on some other YouTube channel where they keep saying that? Because it keeps coming up over and over again. Amber Heard didn't win the UK trial. Well, Johnny Depp lost it, and it was based on all the same arguments, all the same charges. So I guess it's semantics where you want to insist on saying, well, yeah, you want to insist on saying Amber didn't win. But anyway, the fact is Johnny Depp lost on exactly the same kind of accusations. So, if you want to make that argument over and over again, I suppose you can. It just doesn't really make any sense to me. But I suppose if you're on certain other YouTube channels that are saying that, they've got to say that, because otherwise, what do they say? That's kind of a bit of an egg on your face thing in the legal sense. Yvonne says, number one, she doesn't like to lose, like most people. Two, negative attention is better than no attention. Yeah, I don't know if number two is a very fair thing. Like, I think you're being a bit cruel saying that. Like, would you want to go to trial and sit through all of that? And also, the vitriol that she's already been through, would you want to put yourself through that? So, I mean, just try and probe your own humanity. Like, if you had to ask yourself, would I want to actually sit in trial and have, like, your name is a turd? Would I actually want that? And if you think that this person would, I think maybe it's being a bit cruel, because I don't think you would. And if you think that she's just a strange person that wants that kind of attention, I don't know whether I agree with you on that. Anyway, Okay, so the fact is, where we are now is her legal team tried several lines of attack, and that they tried to bring up the juror aspect. They try to bring up this whole idea that the defamation that was relevant to causing damage was surrounding a certain period, and could you prove that Johnny Depp lost whatever 10 million in that period, when he'd already sort of lost the Pirates of the Caribbean thing, etc., etc. And so that was the other argument, was that could you prove that these damages had taken place? I thought that was quite a good argument personally. And I think I've spoken about that in a previous live. But anyway, the point is all of the arguments didn't work. And so I think you can kind of understand the judge basically saying the trial went the way I intended. I had a very good courtroom and everything I did was right. And so I'm signing off on my courtroom and everything I did was correct. Now, I remember with the Oscar Pistorius trial, I remember the same thing happening. The judge said, I'm not giving you an appeal. Basically, what I said, what I decided was the right decision. And I remember certain lawyers pontificating at the time saying that there's nothing wrong with a judge basically saying, oh, do you want to appeal this case? Well, why don't you take your chances? In other words, you don't necessarily need to take it personally as a judge. So you might say, okay, this is what I found, but maybe another court scenario will find a different outcome, and you're welcome to try. So off you go, kind of thing. I know this is not quite the same because they were asking for a retrial, which is effectively saying we need to draw a line through everything that we went through. But an appeal, as far as I know, that is not something that the judge can rule on. Someone else decides whether an appeal can go forward. I'm not really sure whether at the first step the judge has that. I'm not sure if it's different in America. But even if the judge says no, you can then appeal to the Supreme Court and then gets heard over there. David Bebb says she can easily file bankruptcy to avoid judgment while still going after Johnny for her 2 million. She could do that, but if she did that, she would basically be throwing in her cards and basically saying, okay, I'm not going to fight for this. And that's why I say maybe you should just consider why she's doing this. Is she doing it because she's an evil liar, or is she doing it because she truly does have a case? What do you think the answer is there? Or is it both? Is it both aspects that are true? Karina says, from the little that I saw and heard, Amber was persecuted and convicted by society. The trial was not fair, I believe. So, there are quite a few people here who have different views here. So what I want to ask you guys is, if Amber Heard is guilty, right? So if you believe she's guilty, and I think most of you do, and if it was a witch trial, so if you say, you know what, but actually kind of was a witch trial, was it justified? So the question is, if she was guilty and if there sort of was a witch trial, was the witch trial justified? What do you guys say to that? What do you guys think about that? So in terms of the poll, make sure you vote there if you haven't already. The yeses are at 31%, so almost a third saying that it did feel a bit like a witch trial. and around about 2/3 saying no, it didn't feel like a witch trial at all. Okay, so let's just have a look at what you guys are saying. Alicia said she did it to herself, in my opinion. I've heard that quite a lot. It's all her fault. She did it to herself. Yvonne says, I don't like witch trials. I would just be interested to see if anyone says, she's guilty and it sort of was a witch trial and, what she got exactly what she deserved. Is that what you guys who say she did it to herself? Or are you saying that it was a witch trial, but what can you expect? She got what she deserved. So in other words, she deserved a witch trial. Is that what you're saying? Tanya Roden says even the worst serial killer never got so much hate. I think that's a good point. David says witch trial connotates illegitimate. This was not illegitimate. So then you've got to say, so was the case in the UK illegitimate? Because it was dealing with the same issue, and then there were two different legal outcomes. So which one are you saying the case in the UK was illegitimate, and then was that then a witch trial of Johnny Depp in the UK? What's your opinion then of that, David? SM Kovalinsky says it definitely had aspects of a witch trial. I find it very interesting if you say Amber's this horrible person and you use all these slurs and then but you don't want to call it a witch trial. I think what's wrong with saying it's a witch trial? I mean, what's wrong with admitting that? Why can't you just say that it was, if it was? Yeah, Tanya says, even the worst serial killer never got so much hate. That's absolutely true. Something that surprised me was I sort of thought, why are no women supporting Amber Heard, just almost like in a gender thing? And it almost seemed to be the opposite, that women particularly hated Amber Heard. And I sort of wondered, why is that? Is it because she's so beautiful? Is it because she's this younger woman? What is the reason why Amber Heard is so objectionable? Is it because she's not clear who she is? She isn't completely truthful. She's not the perfect victim. Is it because she's not straight? Is it because she's dated the richest guy in the world? Is it actually out of sort of envy or jealousy, or what is it actually all about? Like, what's the source of? I mean, it's not just I don't like her. It's like I absolutely hate her. Or based on what? What's the real reason for that? Let's have a look at some of your comments here. Alicia says the case in the UK was against the Sun. No shit. Sharon Tuck says, I don't think she's beautiful. Well, someone came up with some other algorithm that proved or showed that according to a certain golden equation, she's got the most symmetrical face apparently in the world. So some people, I guess, would disagree with you. Okay, so Kathy says sexism as well, and all of what you said. Okay, so another question is a witch trial justified if someone is guilty? So if someone's guilty, it's okay. You can sort of throw the kitchen sink at them. They're guilty. They get everything they deserve, right? So just if you are still kind of on that thing of it's not a witch trial, and these are some of the publications that said that they thought it was. Vogue compared the Amber Heard memes to a witch trial, right? Let's just bring that up. And The Spectator did the same, called it the witch trial of Amber Heard. This was on the 3rd of June. And I think this is a UK-based publication. And then this was just on Medium, Amber Heard, the modern day witch trial. This was written as early as May 22nd, right? And so there are definitely people who strongly believe that it was. I'm also one of them. So, you know, if you're going to say that, it wasn't a witch trial, and then you say, well, there were 20 billion views on TikTok alone on the hashtag Justice for Johnny Depp thing. 20 billion. It's not 200 million. It's not 2 billion. It's 20 billion, right? 20 billion views. There are only 8 billion people in the world, which means if you just average it out, it means every person, including people sort of running around the Amazon and people in the sort of deserts of the Sahara, effectively clicked twice or viewed twice the hashtag Justice for Johnny Depp, basically 3 times. 2 times 8 billion. So if every single person went to Justice for Johnny Depp twice, you'd only be at 16 billion. So effectively, you'd have to have every single person in the world going to that 3 times. Every single human being on this planet. That's quite a lot of views and attention. It's unprecedented. And then to say, no, the Depp trial was completely normal and the outcome was completely rational and the outcome was completely right and legitimate and completely normal. No, the 20 billion things for the one particular candidate means that things were skewed outside the court in a very, very, very serious way. And I do think you've got a screw loose if you say somebody who leaves the trial is going to go home and for 6 weeks they're not going to pay any attention to what's on social media, because that's how people are. People are able to do that. Are you? Are you able to be not influenced by social media? So it just seems a bit of a strange thing to say. Gina says, you've changed my mind regarding whether or not it was a witch trial. I don't believe I was using the proper definition, and you are correct. Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, good point, Tanya. Tanya says she's called turd by the whole world, but he's defamed somehow. I mean, the whole thing on social media was about calling Amber names and sort of having this great party, calling her names, having a party. And it's like, isn't this a defamation trial? Isn't this a trial about you shouldn't communicate nasty things about a person? And then you have this whole circus, this whole party on let's trash Amber Heard online. But it's a defamation trial. Who cares? We're having fun while we're doing it. Kathy Chase, that's an interesting comment, says, I suspect things will be viewed differently over time. Bria says, unfortunately, a rotten personality overshadows her outside appearance. Do you think Elon Musk thought she had a rotten personality? Okay, anyway, so I see there's starting to be some very binary discussions going on. I think let's move on to the point of this live, which is to talk about, is the witch trial of Amber Heard connected to Roe versus Wade? Or put another way, how is Roe versus Wade connected to the witch trial of Amber Heard. Now, what I'm really trying to get you guys to think about and to sort of feel is kind of a sense of, is something going wrong with the world? Is something going on that's not quite right? Right? And you might say what happened with Amber Heard is completely fine. I've tried to explain why it's not fine. 20 billion views. I don't know if you're aware of that number, like if you really thought through that number, but something about that shows that things are getting a bit out of whack, right? But what about Roe versus Wade? Is there any connection between Roe versus Wade and the Amber Heard trial? You might say, you know what? I think what happened with Amber Heard is awesome. It's great. And also, I'm so glad Roe versus Wade happened. Is there anyone who feels that way here? Is there anyone here that feels they got a victory in what happened with Amber Heard, and what happened with Roe versus Wade is another victory? Is there anyone here who feels sort of, wow, I've won both of these things that mean so much to me? Spirit of 1776 says groupthink operative in both. Jean Carris, what is that yes to do with? I'm not quite sure what that answer is to. Kathy Chase says Roe versus Wade overturning was horrible. Axie says, oh my God, I do get your connection. Thank you. That's the connection I'm trying to express. SMK Valinsky, no, but I do know many people believe both are victories. So I came across a fantastic article in The Guardian. There seems to be a heck of a lot of what's the word, Bob type reporting. I'm talking about criticism coming from the United Kingdom for things happening in America, and it's just worded in a different way that I find quite interesting. For example, there are more UK publications that would call this a witch trial, whereas Americans would say something else, but they wouldn't call it a witch trial. But there's this really good article from Moira Donegan, and she says there's an anti-feminist backlash silencing women more and more literally, right? And yeah, you've got a picture of Amber Heard, right? Let me just pull it up a bit bigger, right? And it's in this particular article that she makes a link to the overturning of Roe versus Wade, and there she refers to it as a witch trial, right? So just without even reading it, you've got an article about something, and it's dealing with Amber Heard. And then if you go a little bit further down into the article, it refers to the majority overturning Roe versus Wade, and it refers to the 1662 witch trial, right? When I saw this article, I was fascinated, horrified, and I wanted to really share it with you guys, which is what I'm going to do now. Okay, so let's just bring up the article just like that. It's from, I'll put a link to the article in chat for you guys to read if you're interested. I'm going to go through it. And so this is my spiel dealing with this. How is Roe versus Wade and the witch trial of Amber Heard, how are they connected? So if you need, as I say, if you need to be convinced that Depp versus Heard was actually the witch trial of Amber Heard, so let me say that again. This was actually a case of Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard, but it actually became the witch trial of Amber Heard. Johnny Depp was never really on trial. Amber Heard was on trial. But I'm not going to really be doing that here or any more than I've already done. But the fact is, more than a few in the mainstream media as well as this channel, called it exactly that. On May 17th, Vogue, while the witch trial of Amber Heard was still in full swing, asked a series of rhetorical questions. That's from this particular article. I'll put a link to that in chat as well. Let me just do this. So this article came out in on the 17th of May in Vogue, and these are some of the questions that were posed in this particular article. And this is quoting from the article. Isn't the relentless memeing of her a form of violence in itself? Is the pummeling by social media not a type of psychological assault? Are we not witnessing a modern day witch trial? Right? So there's just kind of a question that this person brought up, Aubrey Reynolds. Then Vogue also pointed out the following, saying, Heard is being systematically jeered at and ridiculed like a medieval criminal in the stocks as she catalogues historic, and then the A word, ABUSC. So let me put that there as well. And this is very early on. This is May 17th, very, very early on in the whole thing. Julie Burchill from The Spectator, that's this particular article, also described Depp versus Heard simply and unambiguously on June 3rd, 2022 as the witch trial of Amber Heard. And then I've also referred to this one, right? At least one YouTube channel, I'm not going to mention who it is, but at least one that I know of, couldn't understand how the news could possibly use these terms. And if you're with that majority, and I think many of you are, and you're struggling yourself to put those words into context, you might be following the wrong brand of true crime. You might literally be on the wrong channel. You know, if you just like, I don't understand how you can call it that. There are a lot of channels that are happy to do that, or happy to, have a different view. I spent some time in previous episodes describing the Salem witch trials in a live stream dealing with Amber Heard, but is there any connection then between the witch trial of Amber Heard and Roe versus Wade? Are you sure you want to hear this? And this is where we go to The Guardian, and we go to this particular part there. This is quoting from The Guardian. In his recently published opinion for the majority overturning Roe, Justice Samuel Alito approvingly cited the 17th century English jurist Matthew Hale, a figure best known for his participation in a 1662 witch trial. I mean, you can't be more explicit about it than this. You've got a overturning of Roe versus Wade. One of the judges approvingly cites a jurist from 1662 who's known for his participation in a witch trial. And this person that he quotes is a guy called Matthew Hale, who was hostile to abortion, and he also held a dim view of women's speech and its legitimacy. And if you think that this is all just unfounded, well, you're welcome to go and read this particular thing, So Matthew Hale and Evidence of Witchcraft. You're welcome to go and read that on your own time. So there's the link to that. What I've highlighted here is this part right here. Let's just bring it up. The case that Matthew Hale presided over took place some 17 years later, from March 10, 1662, and it dealt with charges of witchcraft against two women, right? And you can go through this whole thing as if you're interested. You can go through this whole article. So the point is that there is a connection. There is definitely a connection. Let's bring myself back here. Okay. So if you're still not convinced that social media is causing our society to devolve into medieval tribalism, you might want to brush up on your history. Once upon a time, there was a period spanning roughly 1,000 years, beginning around 476 AD and ending about 500 years ago, otherwise known as the Dark Ages. What I'm trying to get at is, you might say, what happened with Amber Heard's no big deal, and I'm, yay, it's actually what I wanted. And you might say, something's happening with Roe versus Wade. I don't really know what it means. It's starting to harken back to a period in our history where there was no light, where our civilization was actually plunged into darkness. And it actually feels like, as a species, that is where we headed. That's the thing that I'm trying to emphasize here, right? Now, the Dark Ages was a period known for its fortresses and castles that were constantly built and hidden behind, only to be attacked and destroyed. People were constantly building castles and only to be attacked and destroyed in them. During this time, the human race was populated by small groups or tribes, right? Or clans or factions or parties. And each of these hated one another's guts, and they made it their mission to destroy one another. And so they did. They went about the task of mutual destruction for over 1,000 years. As you can imagine, things stayed pretty much the same while this destructive conflict persisted. So when all of this is going on, during this dark age, what do you think happens? When people spend all their time hating one another, what do you think happens? Well, the answer is not very much. Is there much technological progress? No. What do you think happens during the Dark Ages besides people bickering, fighting, destroying one another? That's what it's all about, right? That's what it's all about. So you might think there's nothing wrong with hating people. There's nothing wrong with being hateful and all that. It's just part of everyday life. Well, in the Dark Ages, there was a lot wrong with it. It means that you get stuck in a time and nothing really happens. And if you're not lucky, if you're unlucky, you might be destroyed. Your group, your community might be one of those destroyed. Or you might decide, we're going to destroy that community and maybe you'll succeed. But eventually it just becomes everyone destroying everyone else. And nothing really happens for a really, really long time, because that's what everyone's talking about. That's what everyone's thinking about. That's what everyone is doing, right? And we are actually heading towards that right now. We're heading towards that sort of cyclical, that damaging, that downward spiral. Now, I can't remember where I heard this, but I heard somewhere that for 1,000,000 years, hominids weren't able to improve on a simple stone axe. Now, whether you believe in evolution or not, just that idea that you've got this monkey-like creature, and for 1,000,000 years, he just cannot innovate. For 1,000,000 years, it's not like, if you think about somebody lives, let's say, 80 years, it's almost 100 years. Well, 10 of those lifetimes is 1,000 years, right? And now 1,000 of those generations and lifetimes get you to times that, get you to 1,000,000 years. And in all of that time, all of those lifetimes, someone just isn't able to figure out, how can I make this axe any better? If you think about the innovations we have today with toothbrushes, cell phones, computers, cars, everything else, innovations are happening constantly. Well, that was a time where it took 1,000,000 years for a little bit of creativity to blinker on in a consciousness and have some sort of simple improvement to a stone axe. That's also what happens in the Dark Ages. You just are unable to progress, right? Now, imagine just an unfathomably long period, tens of thousands of entire lifetimes where literally nothing changes. Why? Why does nothing change? And how does that happen? How do you get to a point where nothing changes? how does the inability to think occur and persist for vast swathes of time? Let me say that again, and it's within this context of witch trials. How does the inability to think occur and persist for vast swathes of time? Well, I'll give you a clue. It's got something to do with groupthink, where everyone is thinking the same thing, which is to say, no one's thinking, right? Karina says, I recently took a break from social media just for 3 weeks, but my return was jarring. So this internecine warfare finally ended. This is in the Dark Ages, when a period known as the Renaissance took over, and from there the Enlightenment. Now, what are those periods? What happens that suddenly light comes into the darkness, right? What switch is flicked that suddenly a culture, a community starts to move forward again, right? So what do you think the answer is to that? If you're in the Dark Ages and nothing changes and there's all of this destructive conflict, how can that change into something else? What do you think is the magic ingredient for that? So the answer is that both these periods, the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, were known for the rebirth of things like culture, art, philosophy, and literature. So in a maelstrom where you are hating on other people, you don't really tolerate things like a difference of opinion. You're not really interested in literature. You're not really interested in culture as a thing. You're really just interested in what you know and what you like, right? And so basically, the change that takes place is where humanity emerges from dark and into light. And for that to happen, tribalism, which is darkness, and culture, light, are mutually exclusive. So, in other words, for some reason, the tribes stop bickering and they start taking hands. They start becoming a culture, kind of a unified culture. They start to recognize, oh, that thing that you do is actually quite cool. So, for example, I've been to France. I love France. A lot of people love France as well. Why? Because France is different. They've got different ways of doing a lot of things. The food is different. The way they speak is different. The architecture is different. So many things are different. And a lot of people go there because they want to escape their own lives and they want to experience something that's different, right? But a long time ago, if something was different, you hated it and you had to destroy it. And so where we are now, hopefully, is where you say, I want to go to France because I want to have a bit of difference. I want to go to Mexico or Costa Rica or Africa or wherever because I want to experience things that are a bit different to what I know. If you take that feeling, or where you go on holiday, and you take that thing of, well, that person I don't really understand, so I must destroy them. It's kind of a contradiction. Do you see what I'm saying? But it nevertheless comes down to tribalism, where you say, you're not part of my tribe, so my job is to destroy you. And we thought that we progressed over the last couple of 100 years to a point where, even though we were from different tribes, we nevertheless were part of a world where we could all get along and we could have commerce with one another and do things together. And as a world, we would be in a nicer place. But something like a witch trial, you basically say, wow, you are very different. That worries me. That scares me. I must destroy you. That kind of thinking is going to plunge us into a dark age if it's not already. So the Enlightenment was a period of, so let me just say this again, that the point of tribalism is to extinguish your or my culture, right? The point of it is to say your culture is different to mine, so my job is to destroy yours, and the same from the other person, right? the Enlightenment is a period of intellectual development, which is like a blinding light compared to mere culture. And here, new technologies were invented. Excuse me, were invented, and science became a thing. So within this whole um, progressive society that was the Enlightenment, part of that blinding light of culture was technology. And technology then made a lot of things better and easier. You had things coming into being like trains and um, steamboats and submarines came about at the turn of the 19th century. But all sorts of inventions, the automobile, rockets, and all that kind of thing. You can only have that when a group of people are kind of getting along, where you're not looking over your shoulder, you're not defending yourself, but you can kind of relax and be yourself, right? That period seems to be ending, where you've now got to be very worried about which group you're part of and which group you need to be attacking, right? So if the point of tribalism is to trash science, then what you're going to get is the snuffing out of the brilliant flame of technology. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm comparing science to the law. The law is where you scientifically examine evidence, right? And if you say, well, you know what, social media proved that Johnny Depp's right, so we're going to snuff out any other little arguments, right? I'm just saying as an argument. You might say, I don't actually accept that argument, but just think about the law as a scientific thing where you bring forth evidence and then you say, that evidence means nothing. Okay, well, you may be snuffing out science, right? So where we are now in our history is at a sort of schism in human evolution. At the same time, we are reaching for the stars and interplanetary space. I actually just saw, I think on Instagram, I think it was ABC News, someone was flying in the air, I think over California. I'm not really sure where it was. And from the window of the airplane, they saw a SpaceX rocket flying up into space. And I just remember watching it and just thinking, in a weird way, what a marvelous time we're living in, where you can be flying in a ship while a spaceship is taking off, and that is the world that we're moving towards. But are we going to get there, right? And the person who's responsible for that is the ex-boyfriend of Amber Heard, this person that everybody hates, right? So, as I said, at the same time we're reaching for the stars and interplanetary space, we seem to be regressing into an anal sadistic phase. Think about those words, anal sadistic. Think about those words and think about how Amber Heard was treated by social media. We're going to insist on attacking Amber Heard. We're gonna make fun of her in a sadistic way, over and over and over again, and we're never going to get enough of it. And for a long time, people were afraid machines would become like us, rather than the other way around. A person who's like a machine, fed and nourished by an algorithm, is an altogether more monstrous beast than a machine with some kind of machine-learned human intelligence. A person who's like a machine, fed and nourished by an algorithm, is unthinking, unfeeling, a reptilian necrophile, defined as a person who is sexually attracted to corpses, whom Ernest Becker describes as a character that seems to be the result of a cold, mechanical, joyless, oppressive bringing up. Is that the kind of person, is that the kind of people, is that the kind of culture that we're turning into? A cold, mechanical, joyless, oppressive culture. Is that who we want to be? Are we becoming like machines, fed and nourished by algorithms into these unthinking, unfeeling, reptilian necrophiles? So think about social media in those same terms, cold, mechanical, joyless. This person comes to exist, as Ernest Becker puts it. And by the way, Ernest Becker won the Pulitzer Prize. he says this person comes to exist in a depersonalized, alienating society that has become bureaucratic and industrialized. Now, I must say, lately I've been thinking about what impact has recreational drugs had on our society, right? I'm talking about how many people in a particular country use recreational drugs all the time. Is it 5%? Is it 10%? Is it 20%? Is it 40%? Because more and more you are seeing signs of widespread depersonalization, widespread alienation. Is that coming from nowhere, or is that coming from somewhere? Is it coming from widespread use of these substances because people can't actually tolerate, they can't stand this cold society that we live in, and so they've got to take these substances to feel like human beings again? In a society with complicated rules and procedures, a society filled with delays, for example, long, dry, tedious court cases, and the intimidating, threatening mega machines of the industrial complex, it's easy to feel small and insignificant, powerless and inferior. So I don't know if you've noticed, I'm taking the witch trial of Amber Heard and Roe versus Wade, and I'm magnifying it onto a massive canvas. And I'm trying to show you just how dangerous and, in fact, terrifying our culture is becoming. And if we're not careful, we're going to get caught up. We're going to be sort of swamped up in this flood that everyone is getting caught up in this frenzy, right? Now, you might think of something like Depp versus Heard as being this fun frenzy that you could take part in and get up and enjoy the destruction of another person. But what happens when it's something a lot more serious? What happens when it's perhaps a war? And now you're on that team or on that team. And by the way, there's a war raging across Europe right now. And the Depp versus Heard trial was a distraction from that, right? Another thing just to think about is you might say, you know what? I had a position on Depp versus Heard, and the jury found exactly the way I saw it. And I would never make a mistake, and the jury were right as well. Well, what do you think about the world's or your country's or your community's position on the pandemic? Do you think you were right all along? Do you think you were right not to wear masks? Do you think the pandemic was a conspiracy and a myth and a joke the whole time? Or did you start to change your mind a little bit about that eventually? Or have you still not changed your mind? Is it still a joke? What about climate change, where, like right now, there's a heat wave sweeping Western Europe? Is climate change not real if you're not in Western Europe? Is climate change only real if it's happening to you? Is reality only real when it's happening to you, but if it's happening to someone else, it's not real? So if it's a witch trial of Amber Heard, is it only a witch trial from Amber Heard's perspective, but not to the 20 billion that were, or whatever, all the people that were participating? Is reality subjective, right? So if you think about, you have an individual finding himself or herself in such surroundings that we are in, where we feel so powerless and inferior, do we start to fear openness? Do we fear spontaneity? Do we fear freedom? Well, then isn't social media the cure? Social media allows us to, the whole media landscape is flattened. So we can shout our voices across social media. We can be spontaneous and as loud as we like. And we can hide behind avatars and not get into any trouble. I thought it was quite interesting how when certain YouTubers who made a lot of money out of the trial, when they were identified, they had no comment. They had a comment on every single little slip up and whatever of Amber Heard, but when their privacy came under the microscope, they were suddenly very protective of themselves. In this world, you have people responding to his anxiety by exerting coercive control over others, especially the weak. So the new tribalism may be a hatred of minorities or a weak agenda or even of children. The anal sadistic character prefers things to people, control over freedom, and death over life. A prototype for the anal sadist is the mass shooter, a man who likes online games rather than the game of life, a man who likes shooting people rather than living with them or talking with them. And then I'm almost finished. Becker concludes, quote, the pathology of his perception is to see beauty in that which is frozen and not fluid, that which is possessed and controlled, rather than that which is free and surprising, and above all, to worship those who use force, coercion, and destruction to impose an iron pattern on life and reality. So I just want to ask you, if you've been supporting Johnny Depp throughout, have you not been worshipping someone who uses force? Just a rhetorical question. I mean, did Johnny Depp use force in his relationship with Amber? Did he use it at all? If he did, it feels like a lot of people are worshipping that whole idea. So Becker asserts that democracy needs artists to open up new pathways to living and life. This is precisely what the anal sadist hates and tries to shut down. A witch is the perfect scapegoat for the stuck man-child who can no longer function effectively in a changing world. The witch exposes him in every dimension: his lack of potency, his social awkwardness, his failure to launch. He understands he has lost his vitality, his fluidity, his flexibility, and his only means to regain power and control is by killing the witch. Onesie, thanks so much for that. I appreciate it. Bria, thanks for thanking Onesie as well. Okay, so that is that part of my spiel done. The next part is really dealing with an appeal, and it's something that's completely different. I'm going to take you out of America. I'm going to take you into a totally different case. And in a way, I'm going to bring an elephant into the room, literally. Well, not literally. I'm going to talk to you guys about a case that happened in Namibia where somebody who kept elephants got into serious trouble, and then a journalist wrote a story, and this person who kept elephants felt that he was defamed, right? And the purpose of the purpose of sharing this with you is to just look at a completely different case, totally different, and to look at how a legal question evolves, right? So what I want you to do is look at how this particular case, if you have a kind of a change of heart with this particular case, right? I think I'm going to have to bring up this, maybe not. Okay. I really wish I could go through all of this very slowly, but I don't think we really got a lot of time. But let me get started anyway. So this is from the Namibian. Namibia is a country that borders on South Africa, and this is a case dealing with, was there cruelty to elephants or not? Were elephants kept in captivity in a bad way? So let me read this through. The Supreme Court is due to decide if a game dealer was defamed by a newspaper article about the conditions in which captured elephants were kept at a farm in the Marienthal area about 5 years ago. So that's how long this whole thing lasted. It was 5 years from the time that all of this happened till the end of the appeal. That's how long it actually went on. So anyway, it goes on to say, this is after the court on Friday heard oral arguments on an appeal against a high court judgment in which game dealer Johan Lombard and his close corporation Golden Game CC won a defamation suit against the newspaper. So in other words, The newspaper criticized this guy, and then he sued them for defamation and he won. But then the newspaper appealed it, right? And so these are some of the facts of the case. Lombard and Golden Game CC sued NMH and Nakatana, these are media representatives and companies, for a combined amount of 200,000 Namibian dollars after an article about conditions in which 3 young elephants were being kept at Lombard's farm in the Mariental district was published in the Namibian Sun in October 2017. So what that's telling you again is, let me bring this up a bit bigger. What that's telling you again is that how long these court processes can take. October 2017 is almost 5 years ago, right? So in the article, environmental minister, so this is a local minister, and the then top official in the environmental industry, Malan Lindeke, were quoted as having described the conditions in which the elephants were being kept at the farm as horrific and deplorable. So a journalist was sitting or was a witness to what these ministers were saying, right? And so it was an environmental minister and a top official in the environment ministry. So a journalist heard these ministers saying this, saying, you know what, this particular farmer, this gamekeeper was keeping elephants in terrible conditions. So then what happened? This journalist went and wrote an article about it. And then what happened after that? As a result of writing that article, the journalist was accused of defamation and the publication as well. It says in the article, it was stated that the elephants were kept in containers, right? So this is something that the defamed person didn't like very much. It was also reported that Lombard did not have a permit that was required to transport the elephants, which had been captured at a farm in the Grootfontein area that's in Namibia, and that his farm had not been approved by the Environment Ministry for elephants to be kept there. So you kind of get a sense that was this sort of an illegal elephant farming kind of going on, right? So it goes on to say, Lombard told High Court Judge Haneli Prinsloo during the hearing of his and Golden Game's defamation claim that the elephants were in fact kept in a temporary enclosure, right? And then it gives the size, and in other words, they're saying they weren't kept in like containers, shipping containers. Then he said, this was his defense. He said, let me just bring myself back a little bit. He said his reputation and business as a game dealer had been damaged. So just like with Johnny Depp, Johnny said, I lost these movie roles, whatever. This game dealer said, because of what you wrote, you damaged my reputation. And as a result of the report in a newspaper, I lost a contract to sell elephants to a zoo in Dubai, right? So that is the damage that he's saying that he suffered, right? And also to supply animals to a game park in Libya. So you're saying, I lost that contract and another contract to supply elephants to a game park in Libya, which is also in Africa, right? So then he goes on to say, also during the hearing of the case before Prinsloo, Lindeke told the court that the article correctly reflected what had been said at a media briefing of the environment industry. Now, Prinsloo is, I think, the writer of the article. Prinsloo found that Lombard had not been given an effective opportunity to respond to the allegations made against him, and that the publication was not reasonable or responsible journalism. So what do you guys think so far? Do you think that the article was defamatory? Let's get a vote from you guys. If you think it was defamatory, say yes. If you think it wasn't defamatory, say no. What do you guys think so far? Are you guys paying attention to what I'm talking about here? Do you guys think it's defamatory or not? So I've already told you that he lost the contract to sell the animals to Libya. He also lost a contract to sell elephants to a zoo in Dubai. He said he didn't keep animals in the container. So was it defamatory or not? What do you guys think? Actually says not enough info. Yvonne says so far, yes. Jennifer Gill says it depends on the truth of the information. Good point. So I must say, when I read this, I thought, wow, having these people say that it's horrible conditions, and then this guy loses his business as a result of this article. It doesn't look very good, does it? Right? Becca, thanks for joining us. Roses are red says yes. Hi says I would have to read it over a few times. So anyway, the result was that $70,000 and 50,000 Namibian dollars were awarded, but then there was an appeal after this, right? So the question now is, so this game farmer won his case, but then the journalist and the sort of publication appealed it. What do you think happened then? Do you think the journalist had any leg to stand on? Do you think the journalist won the appeal, right? And the question then is, what is going to materially impact the legality of everything? What is going to prove that the kind of the substance of what was being said was substantially true, which if it was true, well, then there's no defamation, right? So during the appeal hearing, legal counsel Natasha Basingwaith argued on behalf of NMH, that's the media company, that the elephants were indeed transported illegally to Lombard's farm. So apparently these elephants weren't part of some sort of legal transfer thing. They were actually being transported illegally, right? And that Golden Game was not registered as a game dealer that could trade in elephants. So in other words, what they're saying is what this game farm was doing was actually illegal to begin with. Then they talk about the enclosure. She also argued that the enclosure in which the elephants were kept had not been approved by the Ministry of Environment, that the animals had not been kept in acceptable conditions. Now, as far as I understand, the animals weren't kept inside containers, but containers were put around to create kind of a perimeter, right? So although the environmental officials kind of got it wrong, they were only half wrong. The conditions that the elephants were kept in weren't completely right, but it wasn't as though they were kept inside these containers. So it goes on to say here, Lombard and Golden Game did not prove that the article was defamatory or that its publication was not reasonable. The actual situation was a far cry from the image portrayed of elephants that were kept in containers, Barnard said. So there's a lot of sort of pushing and shoving here going on where they're saying this one thing and another thing. Then they say, he also argued that the reporter who wrote the article made only minimal efforts to contact Lombard for comment by trying twice to make a call to his cell phone. There was no urgent need to publish the article, and the reporter should not have simply accepted the correctness of the remarks. In other words, they're saying that the problem, thanks a lot, Ricardo, the problem here was that the reporter should have made sure. The reporter should have kind of done a private investigation, right? And now if you think about that and the Amber Heard case, you say, should Amber Heard have provided evidence with her article? You know, like, should she also have done an investigation kind of thing to absolutely prove everything she was saying, right? Because here it says, she should have investigated the matter further before writing a report, right? That was from that article. Now we go to this article. So as it turned out, the newspaper actually won the libel case. I don't know why this is so. Let's just do it like that. So there was an appeal, and the newspaper actually won the libel case. And this is what they found, that the farm owner was not defamed by a newspaper article in which captured elephants were kept at his farm about 5 years ago. The Supreme Court found in an appeal judgment on Friday. The article about allegations of ill treatment dealt with a matter of compelling public interest. Then it says, the newspaper's journalist, Eleni Smith, who wrote the article, was entitled to accept the correctness of statements which Environment Minister Pohamba Shafita and then top official Malan Lindeke made at a public press conference about the conditions in which 3 young elephants were kept at a game dealer. So literally what this is a journalist who's sitting at a press conference, who's told something, and then writes an article about it, and then is sued. And then the question is, didn't that journalist have every right to assume that what was told at the press conference by ministers was true? And it turns out that what the ministers said was substantially true. May not have been technically true, but it was substantially true in that there was illegal elephant farming taking place. In other words, it wasn't technically true that the elephants were inside containers. They were being housed in a sort of a, what's the word? A enclosure, where the enclosure seemed to have been created by putting these shipping containers around them, right? So some of the statements made in the article were untrue, but they were substantially true, if that makes sense. And within the context of what's the greater legal question is, well, was this guy supposed to be trading with elephants or not? Now, with Depp versus Heard, you could say, Amber, what she said there wasn't right, and she tweeted this article, and that does this and that and that. But was the basic thing that she was saying, was it true or wasn't it, right? That's really the comparison you make here. So it goes on to say there was no indication that Smith, and then editor of the newspaper, had a casual or slipshod or careless approach to a report. Now, I think if you compare that to when Amber Heard wrote this article, she didn't just write the article, she actually had her own lawyers look at it. She actually had her own lawyers make it legally defensible, I guess, right? And that is the same thing as this. She didn't write it in a casual or slipshod manner. Does that make sense? I don't know if maybe you disagree with that, but I just think it's quite an interesting analogy to make here. It goes on to say, by accurately reporting those statements, the requirements for a reasonable or responsible journalist were met. Now, what is interesting here is the way that the article is treated as a piece of journalism, whereas Amber Heard's article isn't treated in the same way. And what I think is also quite interesting is the way that the farmer found not only the article, but the company publishing it responsible. Why did Johnny Depp not also sue the Washington Post, for providing a platform? And of course, the Washington Post is owned by Jeff Bezos. So that's quite an interesting question. I'm just saying, in this particular case, the farmer sued the owner of the publication as well. Johnny Depp didn't. He just went after one person, which I think is quite interesting. Then it goes on to say, it talks about this reference to the conditions as horrific and deplorable. And then it says, the elephants which had been captured at a game farm in the Grootfontein area were kept in an enclosure made of shipping containers. Lombard claimed during the hearing of the case in the High Court that his reputation in business as a game dealer had been damaged by the article. In his judgment, Smith said it was stated in the article that the elephants were kept in containers at Lombard's farm. He said a photograph published in the newspaper did not show the elephants inside a container, but rather in a very cramped and sparse enclosure surrounded by containers, a scene which depicts an enclosure which would be unacceptable for keeping elephants for any length of time. They were kept, or for any length of time for that matter. So the bottom line is the elephants were kept in a inappropriate. They were looked after in an inappropriate way, right? Again, what they're trying to get at here is it doesn't really matter whether it's technically true. It matters whether it was substantially true what the article said. And yeah, you've even got a photograph showing that there were cramped and sparse enclosures, that the enclosures weren't adequate. And again, I want to compare this photo, which is not showing elephants inside containers, which that would be what you'd want to see. Instead, it shows cramped and sparse enclosures, right? Now, the same with Amber Heard. You might say, you know what, the photos we're seeing, I'm just not really happy. They're just not quite bad enough for me to accept them. I'm just saying in terms of this, they basically are asking, were the elephants kept in a proper way, yes or no? And then is this article accurate in referring to that, right? Is the article malicious? Did the article just invent this to be malicious? Or is it based on something, right? Then he goes on to say, Smuts concluded that the article satisfied the standard of reasonable or responsible reporting, and that this defense raised by Namibia Media Holdings should have succeeded. So on appeal, the judge said, you know what, actually the reporting was reasonable. Actually, it was responsible. It wasn't completely right. It wasn't completely justified, but it was substantially accurate. And I would love to take you through the much longer version, which has got a lot more detail. But what I found really, and I got that detail in an email from this publication. I just get this from just South African Law, Legal Brief, A Matter of Justice, and it's a very, very long article. But when I read it, I found myself changing. I found myself changing my mind about it. In the beginning, I thought, well, this and that and that, and then later on I saw, wow, so the farmer was actually not doing things completely legally, apparently, according to the article, according to the information. And so that can happen. It can happen that in an appeal that further information is dealt with in a different manner. Is that going to happen with Depp versus Heard? I don't know. I guess that remains to be seen. We also don't know for a fact whether there will be an appeal. I think that is contingent on Amber getting this book deal. And until a book deal is sort of announced and it's carved in stone, I don't know whether there's going to be an appeal. So I'm going to have a look at some of your comments here. Just put that up. Okay, so I hope you guys have found this interesting. I mean, that's really the point of it, is to share the whole legal, the overarching legal narrative, and to see, wow, that's actually quite an interesting, way that things sort of evolve and are dealt with. Becca says, poor elephants. Kathy says, yes, very interesting. So I'm glad you did find it interesting, Kathy. So I'm approaching an hour and a half. I'm not going to take it further than that. I'm quite surprised I got this far. I actually forgot to bring a glass of water, but I seem to have managed okay. Komarebi says, this discussion exemplifies why I feel this is hands down the best YouTube channel out there. Wow, that's a great compliment. Thanks a lot. Bruce T says it was an illegal, non-certified operation involving illegal transportation, and the elephants were kept in unsuitable conditions, possibly illegal. The article actually underplays this. Yes, no, totally. But I'm just saying it was actually really unreasonable for the owner to say, you should have called me and you should have fact checked and all that kind of thing. And she was totally justified in accepting the information from what you would anticipate would be authoritative sources, which is the ministers of the environment. And it turns out that they knew what they were talking about, which is quite interesting. One Solved Mystery says, so in a way, Amber Heard is kind of like an elephant. Well, you know what they say about elephants? They've got long memories. Apparently, the memory part of the elephant's brain is bigger than a human's brain. How's that for some useful information? One Solved Mystery says, you have an interesting way of thinking about things. Thanks, I appreciate that. So if you guys are interested in the next couple of days, I'm going to do a live tomorrow on Caitlin Armstrong. There's some information I really want to deal with. There's some amazing photography I also want to share with you, which I think needs to be in a live stream format. But I'll also be doing part 2 to the baby, I Want You Back So Badly. A few people asked a question about that. When I originally wrote that script, that was the title that came from an article that I was going to reference immediately. And then I started sort of going further and further back to make my case. And then it became so long that I felt like I had to make it in 2 episodes. So the next episode, you will find out what is the source of Colin Strickland actually saying that. I don't know if you guys noticed, Colin Strickland has set his Instagram to private. So he's starting to feel perhaps the heat of the media and the law and all sorts of other things. Terry Dean says, can't wait for that. Tits up, good to see you here, says, elephants never forget. Megan Fox says, I honestly don't get the correlation. What correlation? Sharon Tuck says, show Nick some love. Put a like there. Concentric Colored Arc says, Nick, I appreciate your sane take on the Amber Heard situation. Just imagine that a woman who spoke out against DV is more vilified online than, yeah, for sure. Sky Kerrigan, okay, thank you, TCRS. Good night, everyone, and consider joining us on Patreon. Well, Sky's already saying good night, and we've got 2 minutes to go. Onesie says, yes, I am interested in everything you discuss. Okay. Yeah, in terms of Vincent van Gogh, I actually saw that story way back, and then I just thought I'll bring it up in the next Van Gogh letters, and then it kind of broke worldwide. But I do get Vincent van Gogh alerts, believe it or not. And so I saw it very, very early on, this amazing painting that came out in Scotland. Megan Fox says, I don't see any link between Roe versus Wade and Heard. Seems like a stretch. Well, I'm not going to go through that again. If you're not sure, you should have a look at this article, which there is Amber Heard. You know, if someone who looks at pictures, and there is Roe versus Wade and a reference to witch trial. So if you're someone who reads, then maybe you can give that a read. One Solved Mystery says you had to be there. Thanks a lot, Elise Fairbanks. Appreciate that. Thanks very much. Yeah, so if you found this quite an interesting, just interesting discussion, then you're in the right place. Put it that way. Karina, thanks very much. I loved how you took us from the circus of the trial to the broad canvas of society and the impact of social media. Karina, what about the elephants? Did you love that? Megan Fox says, I'll rewatch. Good to see that. I hope so. Okay, so let's go back to the poll, and then I think that'll be it. So 33%, so it is around about exactly a third of you say it did feel like a witch trial. And I think that is quite, that's quite a large number to the number that I would expect. A third of you saying that it did feel like a witch trial, that is definitely more than I would have expected to see. But I feel the same way. I do think it was a witch trial, and as I say, some of these other journalists did as well. And I think if you still don't think it was, I think you just need to think about 20 billion views on TikTok alone. And if that's not a witch trial today, in today's world, what is? What is your version of a witch trial? In other words, a trial where a woman is being vilified. What qualifies as a witch trial for you if this doesn't, right? And then 2/3 of you believe that it wasn't a witch trial. Well, that's maybe a number, maybe a number that'll change over time. We'll see. I do think we need to really pay attention to the way our world is changing, and not necessarily for the better. I thought that Lisa Wilson, my co-author, once upon a time, I thought she said it so well when she said, social media is destroying the fabric of society. And I don't think that is overstating it. I really don't think it's overstating it. And I want you guys are part of the true crime community. I want you guys to play your part in not being tribalists, in being people who see what we have in common. Instead of being binary, see what you can, where we can agree with one another. Don't concentrate on our differences. Focus on what we have in common. What are our shared interests, right? It's only that way that we're going to get through things together, because hate begets hate. So even if someone's being nasty or unkind, try and find a way for this whole social media monster to be to be undone, so that social media becomes a better place. And in a way, I think it's a pity that Elon Musk didn't buy Twitter, because Twitter probably, and other social media, probably needs to be more geared to the greater good, and rather than the whims of the individual. I don't know what you guys think about that. Okay, so that is it. I'm going to say adieu. Yvonne says, focus on the positive. Yes. Becca says, hate begets hate. So true. Terry says, thank you for being our shared interest, Nick. Thanks a lot. Yeah, Concentric Colored Arc says, why aren't 20 billion people buying Depp's movie tickets? Or how about the album as well? How about the album? Okay, guys, thanks very much for being here. Don't miss the live at around about this time tomorrow on Caitlin Armstrong, an aspect that is definitely quite interesting. So don't miss that. Thanks for listening. Thanks a lot for the super chats. Thanks also to the members and to the mods who made it for this live. Thanks a lot, guys. Stay cool for those of you in Europe, and take care. All the best. Okay.